Well, to create the soundtrack for a video game, ideally the conversation should happen very early in development. So there's a team that's developing a video game and they've got an idea for the kind of experience that they want to communicate. And they should have a conversation with the composer very early who should be integrated into the team. I think the more integrated the composer is into the team, the more the music is going to feel like it's an integrated part of the experience. So first is just kind of knowing what the game is about, making sure you're on the same page in terms of creative direction. When you're scoring a game, it's important to know what the system can do, what the video game system can do. So spotting a game is a little bit different, that you actually have to go through and say, what are the potential activities or actions that a player can perform? So for example, you could associate music with geography in a game, or you could associate music with the AI system. There's all kinds of different parameters. And so knowing sort of what the game knows, and then finding out which of those elements are the most important to underscore to the player with music. That's the next step of sort of scoring the game. And then in terms of actually producing the audio content, from that perspective, it's very similar to producing any other kind of music. Basically, what we're dealing with in a video game, in a modern video game, is digital audio. So anything we can record is fair game. And it's sort of style agnostic. That's something I like to stress. There have been rock and roll soundtracks, orchestral soundtracks, electronica soundtracks, big band, or even symphonic band soundtrack, string quartet, anything. Once that music is recorded, whether it's produced in a digital audio workstation or whether it's recorded in a studio or completely synthesized from scratch, then comes the question of actually chopping it up into modular components. And this is one of the big unique things about video game music, is that we're dealing with individual assets. What we're delivering as a final deliverable as a composer is not a finished hour-long soundtrack, but it's all these individual elements that can be modularly recombined depending on what ends up happening in the game. And then ideally you should have a chunk of time reserved at the end of the game to really mix it, to really look at everything it might do and just make sure it does what you're supposed to do. In the early days of video game soundtracks, people would still have this sort of film paradigm that, an hour of music would be plenty or even less. And it just doesn't scale. If you've got a 2-hour movie filled with an hour of music, maybe that's fine. But if you've got a video game that can be played for 50 hours, 100 hours, more in some cases, you need the idea of just taking the same ratio and expanding it doesn't work. You can't have 50 hours of music for a game that you might play for 100 hours, something like Skyrim or World of Warcraft or something like that. So what becomes very important is devising strategies to take musical components and reshuffle them, sort of recombine things in a way to create new and fresh variations that respond to what's happening in the game. Because there are so many variables in how the game might go forward, you need to write music that has the potential to respond to all of these different trajectories. And that's why creating music for a video game usually takes a lot longer than creating music for some kind of linear medium. What I'm observing is that a lot of independent games now are operating sort of at the level that some of the major players would have been operating at maybe 15 years ago. When I started in the industry, coming up on 18 years ago, I was one audio person working on a team for one game. And these days, a high-end AAA game will have a huge audio team. So to a certain extent, independent game studios now are sort of similar to the way the major game studios were operating 15, 20 years ago. Well, I think in a successful collaboration, the soundtrack for a game and the creative direction of the game should really be the same thing. You're telling the same story. And so to a certain extent, the music is there to support and underscore the drama of the game. So in a lot of situations, I've had people come up to me and say that they remember aspects of music from a game that I've worked on many years later, that it's the music that comes back to them. And sort of, when you hear the music, you remember the whole game, you remember the whole system of what's going on in the game. And that's what I think is really special.